In this video, we introduce the perfect and pluperfect active indicative of Koine Greek. So you may or may not have heard this before, but Greek is a highly inflected language. It's going to change its forms of words based on their grammatical function in a sentence. We've seen this a lot with verbs now, and we are finally coming to our final tenses. So far in this class, we have already seen how the present, the future, the imperfect, and the aorist all change in different ways to form themselves in Greek. And this week we get to the perfect, the pluperfect, and the future perfect is included in here. It's so incredibly rare in the New Testament that we won't be addressing it at all, but we will address the perfect and the pluperfect. Most of our attention will be on the perfect in this video because like the future perfect, the pluperfect is relatively rare in New Testament Greek as well. And so, since we have all of our tenses out here now, I want to give you this sort of way that I think about tense in Koine Greek, a sort of way for us to visualize the different tenses and how they function with respect to time in most cases in Koine Greek. So, here we have the aorist as a single point in time. Remember, I have regularly described simple action, which the aorist expresses as a single point in time. The action is viewed as a whole, whereas the imperfect, the action is ongoing. It's viewed as ongoing. It was happening. I was loosening, or I was loosing in past time. That ongoing action was finished in the past with the imperfect. Whereas with the present tense and the future tense, the action can be ongoing. I am loosening. The action is happening before the person's eyes in the present time or in the future. I will be loosening as an ongoing action. Then the present and the future tenses in Greek aren't going to look any different when simple action in present time or future time are being referred to. They won't look any different from the ongoing action. So luo can mean either one of these, simple action or ongoing action. The same is true with the future, luso, that sigma, remember, being our tense formative of the future. Can be I will loosen, the action viewed simply as a whole, or I will be loosening as ongoing action. With respect to the perfect, we get sort of a combination of the past time and the present time. You'll hear and see in just a moment here that I describe the perfect as completed action with present results. So the perfect happened in the past time. I have loosened. The loosening was completed in the past, but the act of loosening still has effects that continue on into the present or even into the future. And what the pluperfect is going to do is take this whole thing and shove it all the way back into the past tense. So as we'll see, the pluperfect will be I had loosened. I had loosened in the past. The action stopped in the past, and it continued to have action. It continued to have results in the past that were completed in the past. So the meaning of the different verbs here that we have seen so far in this class. So in all cases, we're still working with the active voice and the indicative mood. So we have the present active indicative here with our present time, continuous action or simple action. Future time, the time of the action is in the future. The action is either simple or ongoing. The imperfect, the time is usually the past and the action is viewed as ongoing. With the aorist tense, the action is in the past and it is viewed as a whole, as a point. And with the perfect active indicative, to use our same sort of terms here, we have past time with present results. The action was completed in the past and the results continue on into the present or even into future time. And then the pluperfect, remember, is going to move the perfect even further back. You can think of it sort of as the more past tense of the perfect, so that the past time, the action completed in past time had ongoing results in the past, and those results had completed by the time of writing or saying the pluperfect. And so we've talked about how Greek verbs are inflect, that Greek is a highly inflected language. They're going to change their form in order to indicate different time, person, number, these kinds of things. So we've seen this with the present active indicative, that mostly we're dealing with changes in the person and number. With the future active indicative, we get those changes in person and number, and we get the sigma tense formative of the future. And then we saw with the imperfect and the aorist, we get something new. We get an augment at the beginning of the verb with those endings then added. So the perfect and the pluperfect are also going to use these secondary suffixes, the same ones that the imperfect and the aorist do. So being familiar with those already is going to help you with respect to memorizing the perfect. And this is going to be the paradigm that you are asked to memorize from the perfect active indicative of luo. And what we get with the perfect active indicative and the pluperfect active indicative, rather than an augment, we get what is called reduplication. For the perfect active indicative. And then with the pluperfect, because remember I said it's sort of like the perfect in past time, we get the augment and reduplication. So there's reduplication in the perfect active indicative, we get the stem, and then we get this morpheme ka. This kappa is going to be something that's characteristic of the first perfect. That when you see a kappa, oftentimes you can think or assume that you're going to have the perfect active indicative. Of course, if the stem of a verb ends in a kappa, that's not going to be the case. But oftentimes when you see a kappa towards the end of a verb, it's going to indicate to you that you have a perfect verb. And then these secondary suffixes, the ones that we have already seen with respect to the imperfect and the aorist, are going to be stuck on to the end of the after the morpheme here. And then in the pluperfect, we get the augment, the reduplication, the stem, and we get the perfect morpheme, but it's slightly different. The alpha has gone to an epsilon iota. So this is technically speaking, the connecting vowel has changed from kappa alpha to the diphthong a. And so we said that one of the things that is characteristic of the perfect tense is reduplication. And just as we saw with the aorist and the imperfect that the augment happens in different kinds of ways, so also does reduplication happen in different kinds of ways, depending on what the beginning of the verb stem looks like. So the most common way you're going to see reduplication with perfect tense verbs is the initial consonant of the verb stem repeating itself and sticking an epsilon between that reduplicated letter and the stem. So in the case of luo, we get the lambda repeated, the epsilon stuck in there, so that we go from luo to le, luka. And then this ka again being the morpheme of the perfect active. And then in another way that we'll see reduplication is that if we have an initial, what's called an aspirated consonant, it will change to its deaspirated version and then again add the epsilon. And these all will look and sound very familiar. So these, the phi, the theta, and the chi are all the aspirated versions of pi, tau, and kappa. So you can hear in the aspirated, the spirit, the sound, the noise coming out with the f, and the same with f and k. You have your breath is coming out when you say that. What happens when it deaspirates? It goes to the hard sound that's associated with it. So pa, ta, and ka, where the th sound is not in there. So phane ra'o, a verb that means I reveal, is going to be in the perfect tense. Pe phane roka. So we go pe fa, pe fa. This is the reduplication here. And then with therapuo, I heal, is going to go to te therapua. So Greek didn't like the sort of repeated sound of the therapua or the fere phane ra'o. So it makes that hard sound at the beginning. And then with kairizomai, we go to ke kairismai. And this is a verb meaning I rejoice. So the short of it is that if the stem begins with one of these consonants, they're going to change to this consonant and add the epsilon in reduplication. And sometimes you'll see that a word will not add another consonant to the beginning of it. So if the initial consonant of a verb stem is psi, zeta, or xi, or two consonants in a row, excluding the combination of a consonant plus lambda or rho, because this commonly happens, then reduplication will look like an augment, and it will simply be epsilon. so that you'll sometimes just epsilon will be the sign of reduplication. And that's a little bit confusing, of course, because the augment is also the is part of the way that the imperfect and the aorist are formed. So you'll have to be able to recognize from other elements in the verb, namely those endings, that you have a perfect rather than an aorist or an imperfect. And then lastly, if the stem begins with a vowel, the vowel will lengthen just like an augment. So these last two options here are going to look like the augment that you learned for the aorist and the imperfect. And as a reminder, this is what the different vowels are going to augment to. An alpha or an epsilon is going to lengthen to an eta. An omicron is going to lengthen to an omega. The diphthongs alpha iota and epsilon iota are going to lengthen to an eta, and then the iota is going to subscript. It's going to go under the eta. And then an alpha hoopsilon or an epsilon hoopsilon is going to go to eta hoopsilon. And we'll see some examples of this when we get to some of our practice here. So when we put this all together, what our forms are going to end up looking like, if we have our perfect active indicative, we have the reduplication, we have the stem, we have the perfect morpheme, and then we have these secondary suffixes, the final result looks like this. Leluka, lelukas, lelukin, lelukamen, lelukati, lelukasen. And so notice here that there's this new has not actually been used here. So this is sort of an exception in this case. And also that this looks different than the secondary active endings that you have learned. So these are going to be helpful for you for sort of parts of the paradigm over here, but it doesn't sort of cleanly move its way over here. It's not a perfect match. And this is the reason that you're going to be asked to memorize this paradigm, the perfect active paradigm here, because these endings will help you, but they're not going to be the exact match over here. And then for the pluperfect active indicative, and this is for your reference, you will not be asked to memorize the pluperfect active indicative paradigm. We have the secondary suffixes used, we have the augment, reduplication, and then the stem with the perfect morpheme K. And so it's going to look like this. Elelukane, elelukase, eleluke, elelukamen, elelukete, elelukason. So you can see once again that in this case, actually, the secondary endings match up really well with the paradigm. But this is not the one that you are memorizing. And so the other thing I want you to notice here is that the perfect active indicative paradigm looks and sounds a whole lot like the aorist active indicative. So if you memorize this paradigm well, this is going to be easy peasy. So you have down here in the aorist active indicative with our sa morpheme, which sounds a whole lot like ka, we get elusa, elusas, elusin, elusamen, elusati, elusan, and you can hear the similarities in leluka, lelukas, lelukin, lelukamen, lelukati, lelukasen. So the biggest difference in sound and visualization is going to be in the third person plural here. And just as we have a second aorist, we also have a second perfect. So if you remember, the second aorist is an aorist that does not use that sa tense formative, but rather changes to a strong form of the verb. The stem is going to change to indicate the second aorist. And as a reminder, we do this in English as well. Go goes to went. Went looks nothing like go, but it's still the past tense of go. We're going to have a similar phenomenon with the perfect. If the first perfect is characterized by the ka morpheme, then the second perfect, excuse me, I have a typo here. We need to change this aorist to perfect. The second perfect is going to have an a morpheme rather than ka. So the kappa drops out, and sometimes you may see the stem change. So in the case of patho, which takes a second perfect, we still get reduplication with pe, but this the stem here, the p epsilon iota, has gone to p omicron iota. So you may see a stem change, and you will not see the kappa in the second perfect. But just like the second aorist, a second perfect is translated just like a first perfect is. There's no difference in translation. It is only a difference in form. So it's going to mean the same thing. It's still past action with present results, but it is just, the verb just looks different. It forms the perfect in a different way. And so verbs may have either a first perfect or a second perfect. They're not going to have, usually not going to have both. They either have one or the other, and it's just the way that they form the perfect tense. And the second perfect is going to be far less common than the first perfect, but there are some very important verbs in New Testament Greek that do take second perfects, and these are listed in Black's Grammar and will be in the vocabulary list as well, so that you are learning the second perfect forms on the vocabulary flashcards. And so to give you an example, if this is the way that the second perfect active indicative is formed, notice everything is the same here except for the morpheme. The morpheme goes to an alpha. And then the stem may also change. In this case, in the case of grapho, I write, grapho has a second perfect. The stem has not changed. The stem is still graph. We still get the reduplication of gay, but then we just have these endings, which look exactly like the first perfect endings minus the kappa. So gay grapha, gay graphos, gay graphin, gay graphamen, gay graphati, gay graphasin. And so you can see and hear the similarities here. Leluka, gay grapha, lelukas, gay graphos, and so on and so forth. And so what I want to do here is just very briefly give you some other paradigm examples, just so you can sort of see what some other perfect verbs look like besides the standard paradigm luo and grapho, just so you get a sense of familiarity with what these are going to look like. So the perfect active indicative of balo is going to have a first perfect. We have the reduplication of the beta here to beta eta, and you'll notice that the stem of balo is actually ble. So the stem is not the same as in the present active indicative. And then we have the kappa alpha morpheme of the perfect. So we get beble ka, beble kas, beble ken, beble kamen, beble kate, beble kasen. So you can hear in the reduplication and in that kappa the perfect very well there. And then the same is going to be true for the endings of gnosko. We still have ka, kas, ken, kamen, kati, kasen. But because these two letters are consonants, gamma nu, remember when the first two letters of a stem are consonants, our reduplication is going to look like an augment. So in the case of gnosko, the first perfect is egnoka, egnokas, egnoken, egnokamen, egnokati, egnokasen, because the reduplication is in the form of an augment rather than the gamma being reproduced for gegnoka. So we just have the epsilon that looks a whole lot like an augment, but the kappa alpha ending is still going to sort of tip us off that we have a perfect here. And then an example of a second perfect where we have an alpha morpheme or tense formative rather than a kappa alpha. So we still hear the a, as, en, amen, ati, asen. It sounds like these ones up here without the kappa, but we still have reduplication as well. So that the P has gone to P epsilon, and the stem has changed a little bit. Notice that from patho, I persuade, is going to pe poitha. So the stem has changed a little bit, but we still get the reduplication, and we get these endings here that sound like the kappa alpha endings, or they rhyme with the kappa alpha endings without the kappa. And then lastly, a very important perfect form verb, the verb oida, which means I know, in the first person singular here. So it's going to take these perfect endings but it is functioning as a present tense. So even in parsing, you will see these forms parsed as present active indicative, even though they are perfect in form. So I know in present time, you know in present time, he, she, or it knows in present time. So I've put the perfect in parentheses here because by form it looks like a perfect, but it's translated and parsed as a present. And then the pluperfect is the form here. So notice these the epsilon iota is characteristic of the pluperfect, and then we have our secondary suffixes with nu, sigma, and so on and so forth. So these look like the pluperfect endings. So they're pluperfect by form, but imperfect by translation and parsing. So this is going to be, I was knowing, or sometimes we can simply translate the imperfect as I knew, rather than as ongoing action in the case of oida. So these are, by their forms, they look like perfect and pluperfect, but for translation purposes and parsing purposes, they're going to be present and imperfect. And these are paradigms you will not have to memorize, but it's because this is a particularly important verb. We use the verb know often, and so do New Testament authors. It's one to be aware of here. And so now we're going to move to a little bit of practice. We're going to first speak and then write. So if you don't have your whiteboard handy, you might want to pause and grab your whiteboard before we speak, because we're going to move in from speaking into writing the paradigm that you are memorizing this week for the perfect, namely the perfect active indicative of the verb luo. So we're going to speak 3 times with me, including the whole paradigm up here. We'll change the color for each one, and you can either say it along with me or right after me. I'll give a second or two after each one. And then the next time through, we'll do it again 3 times without the whole paradigm written up here, so that you're sort of recalling from memory, or we are recalling from memory together. And then we'll move into practice writing the perfect. So let's go ahead and speak 3 times our paradigm of our perfect active paradigm of luo, moving from top to bottom and then over left to right. So we have leluka, lelukas, leluken, lelukamen, lelukati, lelukasen. And again, leluka, lelukas, leluken, lelukamen, lelukati, lelukasen. And we're going to do it one more time. This time I'm going to go a little bit faster so it's more chanting like. Remember that chant can sort of get it to stick in your memory a little bit better. So we have leluka, lelukas, leluken, lelukamen, lelukati, lelukasen. All right, so now we're going to do it again without me providing these here. It's gonna the word is gonna pop up when I say it, but I encourage you to try and say it with me as the word comes up onto your screen, so that you're actually recalling it from memory rather than just trying to read it here. Leluka, lelukas, leluken, lelukamen, lelukati, lelukasen. Leluka, lelukas, leluken, lelukamen, lelukati, lelukasen. Leluka, lelukas, leluken, lelukamen, lelukati, lelukasen. All right, and now get your whiteboard, get ready to write. Go ahead and take a look and maybe say aloud one more time in sort of a chant format. Leluka, lelukas, leluken, lelukamen, lelukati, lelukasen. And you can even do this with just the endings if that's helpful for you as well. Ka, kas, ken, kamen, kati, kasen. And so go ahead and take a look, and then I'm going to move to the next slide, and we're going to take these away, and I ask you to pause and go ahead and fill in the paradigm here. It should look like this. Leluka, lelukas, leluken, lelukamen, lelukati, lelukasen. Ka, kas, ken, kamen, kati, kasen. And let's go ahead and do it one more time. See if you can fill in the paradigm on your whiteboard. There it is. Leluka, lelukas, leluken, lelukamen, lelukati, lelukasen. Ka, kas, ken, kamen, kati, kasen. All right, and now we're going to move to a little bit of practice of identifying and translating the perfect in actual sentences. So we're going to do this in a sort of scaffolded way. First, I would ask that you go ahead and pause and read our sentence here and see what you can make of it without looking back to anything in your grammar or to any vocabulary. See if you can get a sense of what is being said here, sort of as a sight reading exercise. So read aloud and see if you can make any sense of this without looking at any resources. And so the next thing that I want you to do is identify and go ahead and write down on your whiteboard the two perfect tense verbs in the Greek sentence. So once again, don't look to any resources yet. I'm going to give you some more support here in a second if you have trouble with this. But identify here the two Greek perfect verbs in the sentence. And see if this can help you. I give you the translation here now. We know that we have known him because we have believed in him. See if this helps you identify the perfect tense verbs. And if you need a little bit more help here, I give you the paradigm for luo in the perfect active indicative. And the paradigm for gnosko. So this is the last help I'm going to give you here. You can go ahead and pause if you haven't identified the two perfect tense verbs yet and do so. And so they are going to be egnocomen and pepisteucomen. So in both of these cases, we see the kappa alpha in there. In the case of pepisteucomen, we also have the reduplication of this consonant, the P, from the tense stem pisteuo. In the case of egnocomen, our epsilon there is actually the reduplication in the form of an augment. We've already seen this verb previously in the video. We have a gamma nu, two consonants in a row. So the reduplication is going to come in the form of an augment, but this kappa alpha is going to tell us that we have a perfect tense. So again, our translation here is we know this a present active indicative of gnosko in the first person plural. We know that we have known him because we have believed in him. So in both of these cases, we have perfect tense. We knew in the past, and the knowing continues into the present time. We believed in the past, and those results continue into the present time, that we continue to believe. And another sentence here, and this one we're going to start by asking you to translate it. So see, go ahead and pause the lecture. Let's read it aloud in Greek, and then see if you can translate it here. Again, don't look at any resources. I'm going to give you more support here in just a second. So here is a little bit more information. We have ake ko ate. Letting you know that this is not a prefect, a perfect. Once again, apologize for my my typos here. So a perfect form of akuo. I don't tell you what form, what person and number. And hemarteka is a perfect form of hamartano. So if you don't remember, akuo is I here, hamartano is I send. So go ahead and see if this helps you. Pause the lecture again and amend your translation or keep working on it. And here I give you the forms of the perfect active indicative paradigm of luo and the perfect active indicative paradigm of gnosko. See if that can help you at all. And lastly, the translation that I have come up with. Y'all have heard, and once again, we have typos. This video is riddled with typos. I apologize for all of these. Y'all have heard that, Hati, I have sinned. So both of these actions are past actions with present results. You heard and you continue to hear. You sort of continue to have that knowledge in your ears. Y'all have heard that I have sinned. So the sin continues to have present results against the Lord.